Good afternoon. This is Rosa Mendez from DEC's Environmental Justice Office. You are here with us at our Climate Justice Working Group meeting, and I'm going to give it just one more minute while we have working group members sign on, and then we'll start the meeting. All right. Good afternoon. Why don't we go ahead and get started with the meeting? I'll switch our presentation over, and then we'll get started with introductions. All right, we'll start with introductions. Once again, I'm Rosa Mendez. I'm the director of DEC's Environmental Justice Office, and I'm going to go across as I see names on my screen. Amy Klein.
Good afternoon, Amy Klein, CEO at Capital Roots in the Capital Region.
Chris Cole.
Good afternoon, Chris Cole, Director for Energy Affordability and Equity at NYSERDA.
And then Jared Bly.
Yep. Good afternoon, folks. Jared Bly, Clean Energy Program Director with the Adirondack Country Association.
And then Abigail.
Abby McHugh-Gruffa, Executive Director of the Climate Solutions Accelerator. Glad to be here with you all today.
Thank you. And Eddie Batista.
Hey all, Eddie Bautista, New York City Environmental Justice Alliance.
And next I have Joe McNerney.
Hi everyone, this is Joe McNerney. I'm the Director of Stakeholder Engagement at the New York State Department of Labor.
Thank you. And from DEC, we also have with us today Alana.
Hi everyone, Alana Cadell-Tuckey, Office of Environmental Justice, Public Outreach Specialist.
And I also see on with us today, we have Jared Snyder.
Good afternoon, everyone.
And today we also, she's gonna be on to help us with any questions from DEC. We have Randy Walker. Okay, great. Now we'll move on to our team from Illume. Amanda and Alex, your introduction.
Hi, this is Amanda Dwelly from Illume Advising. Hi, this is Alex Dunn from Illum Advising.
Great, thank you. And Amanda, I believe I'm passing off to you.
Great. And let me just get it into slideshow mode. Can you see the full screen here in slideshow?
No, we just see the regular view. Oh,
Okay, now we got it.
Rosa, before we jump in, quick question is, do we have an agenda for today's meeting?
We do. So Amanda, we can advance forward till we get there. So today we plan to pick up where we left off last week. We're going to go over the indicators a little bit more briefly than we did at the last meeting, and then talk about the draft scenario. And then you'll hear from my office, as we talked about last week, about the public comment process. But before that, we're just going to go very quickly through the timeline. So we have the next slide, please, Amanda. You all are aware that we have some potential dates for our August meetings, and what we wanted to do was go over the suggested plan for what we're going to cover during those meetings, and then for what we'd like to do in September. So you'll see I have a potential for a meeting next week, and this would be to talk about any outstanding questions from the meeting you have today and what you heard last week, and preparing for when you all are going to vote on the draft indicators and the scenarios. And we also wanted to follow up on any questions you might have had on the integration analysis, which you heard during the Climate Action Council meeting. And on August 12th, the plan is to have you all talk about the indicators to come to consensus on if those are the ones you want to be for the definition of disadvantaged communities. And then for August 26th, a similar process, but on the scoring scenarios. And then the state team will also preview how we've been documenting all of the work that's been going on. So, and the plan for September would be to have a final review, just to make sure everyone is aligned on the indicators and the scenarios, and that will tee us up for a vote on both the indicators and the draft scenarios for the week of September 13th. So that's the timeline that we sketched out as a suggestion. Want to hear from you all what you think about this timeline, any questions you may have for the team and for Illum on what we're trying to do to get you all prepared for voting on the indicators and the scenarios.
Thanks, Rosa. Before we get to the meeting, quick request. Is it possible to share with the working group the Climate Action Council integration analysis discussion that happened last week? I don't know about everyone else, but I literally had to hop right after we made our presentation. So I missed out on the, and I would suspect it's probably the case with some other climate justice working group members. It'd be great if we could get access to what the integration analysis said.
Sure, we can share. We have the presentation, and I believe there was a recording, so we can share both.
Thank you.
Okay, any other comments, thoughts on the upcoming meetings plan?
Rosa, I was going to wait to see if someone else had something to say. For what it's worth, I find the idea of weekly meetings for hours through the rest of August downright depressing and daunting. So I would love to see if there's any way that we could kind of combine some of these goals and expectations. So we're literally not meeting every week in August, but if the rest of the working group members are fine with this driven agenda, I will shut up. But that's my my 5 cents for what it's worth.
Well, Eddie, I think this is Amy. I think the other question is how many council members can, working group members can make each one of these meetings, and what, you know, what that means. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point, Amy. I mean, if group members are not able to sit on these kind of precursory meetings to understand the full lay of the land before they go into the voting part of this, what are the implications there?
Right. So I'll just share that the 3 dates in August that we put as the timeline, those are the ones where the majority of you all indicated you are available for August. So that's why we chose those times. The 2 dates in September are ones we thought the timing fit with everyone coming to consensus and understanding where we are. So not too far away, but not too close to the August meeting, and not too far apart from each other.
Rosa, can you just share, when you say majority, like how many working group members out of the total would be able to participate in each one of these meetings in August?
Sure. So for all of them, and it was different members, there were at least 6 who could attend.
Rosa, one other question I would have is where does our continued feedback on the panel recommendations fit into this?
So that's something we could weave into these 3 August meetings if you needed or wanted additional time for FaceTime to talk about the panel recommendations. We can use these 3 meetings, or if you prefer to come up with like a shorter 1-hour period where we could talk about those, that's something we can also do.
Yeah, no, Rosa, I appreciate, the fact that we may be behind schedule and the need for more frequent meetings throughout August, though I can't say I'm not thrilled about the idea of having several meetings that month, but to Eddie's point, if we could consolidate some stuff or just make it more streamlined or efficient, that'd be great. I'm sure you all have considered that and looked at it from every angle at this point, so I don't want to discount that, but yeah, I'll be there when the meetings happen in order to participate to the best that I can.
Yeah, so to the point of maybe consolidating, I think that all depends on how many questions you have outstanding after today, right? Because we went through a lot last week, and today Amanda and Alex are going to present to you again on the indicators and the scenario. So, what we were trying to set up is different meetings so that you all feel comfortable when you come in to vote in September. There's also, how much review are you going to be able to accomplish outside of the time that we spend together? So I think it really depends on all of those factors. And Alex and Amanda, I know that when we talked, you really wanted to have this time so that you're supporting the working group members with all of this background work that you've been doing for the state. With that said, why don't we see how we feel after today's meeting? We can regroup and sort of assess whether we can try to consolidate these 3 August meetings.
And just, I think that sounds like a great plan, Rose. I would just add, like, if there are things we can build consensus around today, like if, I don't know if there are decision points like that, but if so, like, maybe we could go down that path and get some good stuff done today.
All right, thank you. Okay, Amanda, let's move on to the indicators.
Okay, great. So can everyone hear me, just to make sure? Great. So we, shared a background of that indicators document last week, which had 160 different indicators. I know it was just a week ago, so not everyone might have had a chance to review. But we wanted to provide some time in today's meeting to answer any questions you had about included or considered indicators. And as Rosa said, kind of do a temperature check of what other information or discussion is needed to start forming or building consensus. So just a couple kind of reminders before we open the table. Indicators are just one piece of the scoring scenarios that we're building. At this point, we do have 45 indicators, which is a lot. So as a reference, Cal Enviro Screen has 21 indicators. So adding or changing one indicator at this point doesn't really shift things a lot. It makes little shifts, but consider we also have a lot of other things in the scenarios to tweak. So I think looking at the indicators alongside the scenarios is really going to be informative because the indicators alone, one indicator might not tell you whether community's in or out, but the scoring scenarios will tell you in general what's happening. So I'm happy to take questions on the considered indicators, or if people want, we can just kind of go through the included indicators or anything else. Where do you want to start?
I don't have any questions right now on specific indicators.
Okay.
So Amanda, I think it's worthwhile looking at the list and then kind of going through what was included, and then also I'm wondering how many of you were able to review the big document that we sent out that had both those that we considered and decided not to include versus those that we have included, because that I think will be the main way of driving you all to consensus and feeling comfortable voting on the indicators that we are including for this year.
So I saw, Abigail, sounds like you haven't had a chance, and we didn't expect everyone to review by this week anyway. Jared, how about you?
No, coming out of the meeting last week, no, I have not. It's been extremely. I reviewed them in the past leading up to that, but not since the specific ask from last week.
Amy and Eddie, have you had a chance to look through it or send it to anyone to review? Amy, I think you're on mute.
I have not.
Okay, great.
Amanda, do you want to share that like on the screen and we can go through it again? As far as, I think that might be a nice way of diving in. And to Abby, cool.
But yeah, I think it's easy to kind of get lost in there to see everything that's considered. So I do want to show these few slides and what we're including at this point. So at this point, we do have 45 indicators, and we're waiting for one more. We're waiting for low birth weight, which we're getting soon. About half of them are classified as community burdens and potential risks, and about half are classified as population vulnerabilities. And I'll just show one slide with a full list of each of these. So in the community burden side, we have 5 different pollution exposures, 2 of which are traffic related, overall vehicle traffic density, diesel, truck and bus traffic, particulate matter, benzene concentration, which is a modeled value, and wastewater discharge from EJ screen. We have a number of things in this middle category that we're calling land use associated with historical discrimination or disinvestment. So this has to deal with where facilities were cited, as well as some other factors like redlining. So we have a historical redlining score that we don't have for all census tracts, but we have it for a good number. We have remediation sites, regulated management plan or potential hazardous chemical sites, major oil storage facilities, and this also covers airports and Air Force bases, electric power generation facilities, active landfills, municipal waste combustors, scrap metal processors, industrial manufacturing zoning, so land zoned as industrial manufacturing or mining, utility or waste zoning, and housing vacancy rate. And then on the potential climate change risk side, we have the expected number of extreme heat days over 90 degrees in 2050, so a forecast. We have also forecasts for flooding in coastal and tidally influenced areas, a forecast for flooding in inland areas. We have low vegetative cover included as one indicator of many for heat vulnerability, and the document has a long chapter on heat vulnerability and the many indicators that represent heat vulnerability. We have agricultural land and driving time to hospitals or urgent and critical care. So I will also go through the vulnerability side, and then we can circle back to things on this slide or go into the considered indicators document. So on this side, population vulnerabilities, health sensitivities, we have several sociodemographics that were all mentioned in the CLCPA language. So we have two measures of income, as we discussed. The first is indexed to area median income, so considers that housing costs and income are different in different regions. Then we have another income measure indexed to the federal poverty line, so the same kind of line for everyone in the state, percent without a bachelor's degree and unemployment rate, percent single parent households. As we've discussed in the past, there's limited census data on the kind of the breakdown of different racial or ethnic categories at the census tract level that's reliable. So we are capturing the overall percent classified as the census categorizes Latino or Hispanic individuals. And we have the percent, again, per the census definition as Black or African American, and then we have limited English proficiency defined by the census. Looking at that middle category, potential health impacts and burdens, we have asthma and COPD, ED visits, we have heart attack or myocardial infarction hospitalization, and then 3 variables from the census on health insurance, disabilities, and adults over age 65. We did have that long session a few weeks ago where we discussed some of the limitations in getting health data on certain conditions due to the size and the stability of a rate within a census tract, as well as kind of some of the tracking in place that tends to track, ED visits, hospitalization, people presenting with a condition rather than chronic conditions. And then the last category is housing costs, housing quality, mobility, and communication. So renter occupied homes, housing cost burden, so rental costs as a percent of income, energy burden, so energy costs as a percent of income, manufactured homes, homes built before 1960, households without a private vehicle, and households without internet. So I'm happy to take questions on these slides or go into the considered indicators document.
I don't know if it's a question or a suggestion. So my brain keeps tripping up on the distinction between the burdens bucket and the vulnerabilities bucket. And every time someone asks me about this and I try to explain what we're working on, I can never remember which bucket is which. So I'm wondering, is there just a different name we could give them? And I think part of the confusion comes from, like, in this population vulnerabilities one, there are several things that are then labeled as burdens. And it's just like, so just, is there more precise descriptive language we could use for the buckets potentially that would help people understand what they meant more quickly and easily?
Yeah, that is a great question. And we've been around and around internally as well on nomenclature, particularly because there are very specific interpretations among technical audiences of terms like risks, threats, hazards. So really the first bucket is meant to show kind of environmental characteristics, land use characteristics, and kind of climate conditions. So conditions that people face due to the space that they're located and the facilities or characteristics of that space or geography. So they generally tend to include, characteristics or conditions of a place rather than of the people living there. So yeah, the term burdens came from a desire not to use terms like exposures, threats, risks, or hazards, because those have specific other meanings. And then the vulnerabilities, that's also a broad term for really characteristics of the people living in a place, as well as health sensitivities they may have.
So describing it like that, to me, makes it easier. So I wonder if it's even just like in the little subtext underneath, characteristics of space. And then the other one, characteristics of people. To, yeah, just kind of break it down in layman's terms a little.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's really the simple way to describe it. Things that are more place, things that are about the place, and things that are about the people. But of course, the trick is recognizing that a lot of the characteristics of the place are related to historically what people were living there. But yeah, we can surely note that in the description.
Yeah, Abby, I appreciate that recommendation, because that has been a point of interpretation that's been difficult for me to wrap my head around as well. But Amanda, hearing that explanation that the burdens and risks is, kind of describing the physical space, whereas the vulnerabilities is more like a social space, it definitely helps to like delineate the two.
And I'll add here, I think a lot of when technical reviewers were looking at things, they really didn't like the idea. We originally had this as kind of community or place-based threats as opposed to burdens, which burdens, when we were talking about it, really does feel kind of more people-based. And so I think that's where the confusion is heading. I think we can always put the place-based versus not. And I think that one of the things in service to making sure that this is understandable to your constituents, to everyone who wants to comment, this is actually really, really important for us to do. So I want us to like add a little parenthetical there, but also, it's okay if things aren't technically correct for all the scientific reasons, in the sense that we can define those things later and say, well, a threat is not necessarily a threat in the same way that we think of it in a scientific way, but it makes sense for our brains. So I would like to veer for or recommend that in addition to the parentheticals, we'll do some tinkering on the words so that it is clearer to everyone who's going to read this, for the first time and may not have the scientific background for all that. So I'm going to stop talking now.
Thanks, Alex. So really the point of having this time available today was to answer any questions you might have on individual variables, individual indicators, the overall approach to indicators, and then ask you the big question of what will help you, start to feel comfortable with these indicators, address unanswered questions, and prepare for the vote. So, what can we do to support you and, explaining the indicators, discussing the indicators before a vote.
Quick question and comment, if it's okay.
Mm-hmm.
I guess my immediate question is there, and I thought I picked up on this earlier, is one of the questions being posed to us whether or not we want to further cull down the list of burdens, whichever, like the list of the 45, like is that something we're being asked to do, or was it just kind of noting that it's more than what they're on the hook for to analyze in California, but there is no need necessarily for us to pare down our list? Is that fair? I just want to make sure I just want to make sure we're being responsive to what we're being asked, and I'm not misinterpreting the question or whatever.
We have not explicitly asked that question, so you are kind of reading between the lines, but raise a very good question that is worth talking about. So we've generally been okay with this growing list, though we do recognize, we're balancing kind of the rigor of the tool and really knowing exactly the mechanics that are driving the tool with having a very big list. So what we've been trying to do is weigh what we expect as, and we'd very much like to hear from you, what we expect to be as the general public requesting many, many indicators. So that balance of, towing the line of perfect statistical rigor and maintaining a very short list of 20 indicators, we could toe that line. We haven't tried to do that so far, versus allowing it to get larger so that more people feel comfortable with it. So we've kind of decided, okay, maybe it's not, the most perfect list of, non-correlated things. We have a lot of collinearity and correlation, which isn't wonderful, but we do think it, responds to a lot of people's desires of what they want to see. So I think that's a question for you of like it certainly might be nice to cull down the list because there are a lot of redundant and correlated things, and some of the additional things might dilute the effect of more important things.
Right, and I'd love to hear what others think. Potential redundancies or overlaps aside, I'm not bothered by the length of our list. I think for two reasons, right? One is if memory serves, the California case, and maybe I'm completely off base about this. I thought the California numbers were not necessarily driven by a climate lens. Like I thought that the environmental, like what I already forgot what they call the California system. EJ,
Callan virus
screen. Callan virus screen. Thank you.
Yeah.
Right. The Callan virus screen was really about environmental protection as opposed to the need to drill deep on climate vulnerabilities. So as a result, if you're looking at just environmental, whereas 10 years later we're looking at environment and climate, it would stand to reason that there will be a longer list, right? And so I'm not bothered by the length of the list. While there may be some redundancies, it's hard for me to look at this list and have anything jump out at me that says, oh no, that's not something we should be worried about. It's not a vulnerability. It feels to me like it's a thoughtful, and to think of where we were. Where were we at 120 or 150? Like to pare that down to 45 feels to me kind of disciplined. But curious what others think. But I think that it just stands to reason that it will be longer than Cali because of the climate piece that we're trying to capture.
Yeah, from the scientific perspective, I mean, yes, there are some correlational kind of things happening, but honestly, Amanda and I aren't bothered by it. And in the sense that we were trying to go for a big tent perspective of what was included. And also because the process is different, right? Like this is driven by you all and what you see on the ground. So that's to us the more important factor on this.
Just so I'm clear, Amanda, the ones you read through, those are the 45?
Yes, that's
Okay.
what that's what's in the current scenario, exactly.
Okay. I didn't count them as you were reading, so it didn't seem like 45 to me.
Yeah, yeah. And yeah, so I'm showing here what's in Cal Enviro Screen, and you're absolutely right, Eddie. This tool was really meant to cover environmental and pollution burdens and did not have any climate elements in it. And it also doesn't include race or ethnicity for legal reasons. And we certainly, you know, it might be nice to pare it down a little bit in anticipation of public comments yielding even more things that people want to add. You know, if nothing jumps out at you as things to pare down, we can still do some analysis behind the scenes to really look at what indicators, once you have everything together, really aren't contributing that much, and we can kind of determine, okay, who's in here, but because of so many correlations, isn't really affecting things that much.
So Amanda, I would kind of echo what Eddie said, that I don't, have any particular concerns about having the longer list, but I guess, to move us to the point where we can make a decision, I could see some value in, having two versions to compare. Like our list of 45 and whatever you would see as a kind of tighter, less overlap. I would preface all of this with, I know for myself, but I think for everyone here, we are trusting you as the experts to, kind of look at how the statistics work out and make a recommendation. So if you feel comfortable with this and we feel comfortable with this, that probably means it's fine. But as the experts, if you do have something else you'd recommend, I think we'd love to hear about it.
Great. Yeah, that's something we're planning and analyzing in the next couple of weeks and sharing at that August 12th meeting.
And Amanda, do you mind going back to the earth moving slide?
Sure.
I know we pepper you with lots of metaphors, cake baking and earth moving. But one of the reasons scientifically that we're not as worried about the fact that you have 45 indicators is that there are other things that will have more weight and that we're more worried about in the scenarios that would changing the weighting or the factor importance is going to be a bigger thing. And so in this case, like the 45 indicators that have good data, which is, I think, the really important part here, that we've selected, downloaded, have good data, look like they help, have a theoretical and kind of ground truth experience of something related to a disadvantaged community are in there. And, we can pare it down, but it's really not, even if we pare it down to 30, it's not going to be as, big of a change as these other parts, the thresholds, the factor importance, which are, to me, the ones that in the upcoming meetings where we'll really start playing with those and showing you different scenarios to those effects. But, if today we want to focus on indicators, that list, I think, is the most important.
So we'll take that as an action item to, go back to C. I think that's a great question of if we were to recommend a pared down list, what might be on that list, just to see how sensitive things are.
And maybe the other thing, and this is Chris Cole, the other thing to just keep in mind is, when we go through the public comment process, that'll give us additional opportunity to hear perspectives on, what might be missing from the list, or, whether the list is in fact too large. So I think that'll be important for us to kind of, maybe avoid making any any decisions now that we're not completely sure about, and go through the public comment process.
Yeah, that's a good point. Good point, Chris, and it's kind of a good segue into a question I had that may actually be covered later in the presentation here. But when that public comment period is over and the responses are collected and analyzed, if there are indicators that are not represented in this list of 45 or even the considered ones that seem like they are important to the general public, what is the process for incorporating that into the future, into the list, as far as like pairing it with high quality data sets and everything that you've done, due diligence on up to this point?
Yeah, that's a great question. We haven't fully ironed out that process, but fully expect that many of the public comments will be about including various indicators. California received 1,000+ comments and many suggested indicators, and really had to go through a process of grouping those requests, assessing how related were they to the goal of the definition. Sometimes you see requests that might define other things. They might define opportunities for program enhancements or something, but not necessarily disadvantaged communities. So which of these indicators really do speak to the goals of this definition as in the CLCPA, which are unique, and then we'll have to assess what the current data is. So I think there'll be kind of a process of grouping and filtering down to see, okay, what could really add to this? Do we have data for it?
I'd like to mirror the process that we did in the beginning for the first part, which was really starting to kind of, in that giant crazy Excel sheet that we had where people added all their ideas, and then we kind of tracked down to look whether there was available data and what the quality was. And then if it got to a certain point, once we group those things and prioritize them, then we download the data and start looking through it, et cetera, or assessed whether we needed to do GIS transformations to calculate it. So I think if we can mirror that process a bit, adapt it a little bit to the fact that it's public comment, that's the way I think would be the most efficient way, and well-documented way.
Yeah, and yeah, we certainly anticipate many requests for additions, and that's a reason we might want to consider paring this down just slightly before we go out to public comment, because it's very hard once something's in here to take it out. And if we might have the discipline now to, take a few things out, it could make room for more things later.
This is Rawa. Amanda, thank you so much for that. So you guys had mentioned that you would do an analysis or an assessment of what those things that are not going to really factor in any relevant way, what those would be. And will we have an opportunity then to get that list or those recommendations before we make a decision?
We were thinking that would be, we had planned August 12th, and of course there's discussion about consolidating meetings, but using one of the August meetings to really talk through the indicator list again and see where everyone is to kind of build consensus before the vote. So that would definitely be something we'd want to bring to the table in August as a consideration. So I guess still some questions for you. Are there any specific indicators you'd want to talk to today? And then the other question might be, how else can we help you, explain, think about everything in the considered indicators list or this list in preparation for a vote?
I guess I have a question about, and I'm not sure I can articulate this well, so if it doesn't make sense, let me know. But to what extent does it make sense to include indicators that might not be terribly important now, but could be more important over time? if that makes
Can you, do you have any examples in mind?
Well, I mean, the example that is in mind, and again, I don't know if it's a good example or a bad example, but like, I mentioned last time vector-borne disease.
Uh-huh.
So, maybe not a huge differentiator between communities at this point, but potentially someday could be once climate has kind of, taken its toll a little more.
Yeah.
And again, maybe that's, there may be better examples. And so and I know we have the opportunity to tweak this on a, annual basis, or maybe not an annual basis, but we will be revisiting it and having opportunities to tweak it in the future. But does it make sense if we think there's something that might be a bigger deal in the future to include it now, so we have like the historical tracking of it?
Yeah, I would love to address a few aspects of that. That's a great question. And I think vector-borne diseases is a great example. So currently, I mean, there isn't granular census tract data available on vector-borne diseases. If there were, I mean, we might still be having the same discussion if records in health databases are relatively low to this point. What you'd have to do is create a model or forecast based off of the few records you would have. And I think what would end up happening is exactly what you said. You might have a model or forecast that doesn't actually show that much differentiation between communities. And for anything that doesn't show that much differentiation, that's just not really adding to the models that much, because the way we're scoring things is always on a relative basis. So even if the rates were very high, but communities were similar, adding that in and kind of doing a percentile ranking, if there's little differentiation between communities, it just kind of, negates itself and doesn't contribute a lot. So something like that might have limited initial data or have to be modeled based on a very rough model where communities end up looking similar, might not add a lot at this point. So it might be worth, if there's other things like that, I mean, maybe there are other variables that do have better data or better modeling, but I think that would be my consideration there, that based on the limited data available and what you'd be able to forecast on, you wouldn't end up with something that shows differences between communities much, and also might have a lot of measurement or modeling error in it.
To your point, Abby, I think also adding on that, say something like flooding, I would assume as the climate is worsened and gets really, really bad, flooding is going to get worse. And so, we have it in there. It does have an influence to a certain degree, but not as much right now as we would think. At least, when we think of Long Island, it doesn't seem to do as much as you would think. Correct me if I'm wrong, Amanda. So those are in there, at least to a certain extent already. I think also what we should do, and this is, we have little asterisks around here of saying like, we want this data, but we don't have it yet. The COVID infection rate data, I think, is also something that we want in subsequent years, but we don't have it now. So it's almost like we have a bench of potential players coming up, and I think that's what you're talking about in some ways. There are things that we see that could be useful later, but they're not right now. They shouldn't necessarily be included in this current definition, because as it stands right now, there are better things that indicate whether an area is disadvantaged or not. But in the future, this could be a factor. We should be looking at it, thinking about it, considering it, and monitoring it.
Mm-hmm.
To clarify for my understanding, so I understand that it wouldn't differentiate much between communities, and some of these already aren't, but they're in there. Does it do any harm to have them in there? I mean, it might not make the model better, but does it make the model worse?
That's a good question. If there's a lot of error in those, then it might make it slightly worse, because it's muting. Like, so if you have a very well measured indicator and a poorly measured indicator, and they're getting the similar weight, you're possibly muting the effect of something that has better measurement.
You're also talking to statisticians that are like, have been drilled into them since, you know, little baby statisticians, parsimony and being all like, don't add anything else in there because it's not a good thing. But to Amanda's point, actually, it really is about the invisible error, right? When we see these, we don't have that invisible error. That each of these measurements has some kind of error in them. So the more you add in there, the more time it takes for us to really assess, is this a good measure? You know, there's a lot of times that we spend looking at individual maps and looking at the correlations and looking at the distributions, trying to make sure that this is a good measure of what we're trying to measure. So I'm going to go here, Jared, so that we can unpack it more. Agricultural land, is that a good measure of what agricultural land means? Amanda, I'm not sure you can see Jared's comment, but he asked if we could, can you unpack ag land? That's a very broad term. Does it mean to categorize it in a potential risk in that way?
Sure. So I'm going to go to the considered indicators document for a minute because there were a couple of reasons we included this related to land as well as potential economic things that we couldn't measure. So let me just try to find that. So this is the percentage of a census tract that's designated as agricultural land. So it does two things. It represents drought risk with the idea that areas with more agricultural land are at more kind of economic risk and potentially ecological risk from drought. And we also had discussions a long time ago about undocumented workers and how there really is no way to track. So we were trying to, you know, the secondary purpose of this is potentially as a proxy for workforce in areas where there might be more workers in this area, either with greater economic vulnerability and possibly thinking about heat vulnerability being outside. So there's a couple of reasons for this variable. And the way it's measured, if that's part of the question too, it's from a national land cover database that really looks at kind of land cover in each area.
Okay, man, thanks for the clarification. Is that data set or database looking into the future? I mean, is it dynamic or is it static? Like, in what year is that based on?
Yeah, we had a lot of discussion about whether these whether vegetative cover and agricultural land use, whether we should be using current state or forecasts. And we decided because, you know, any changes to this land use is so based on human decision making and development patterns, macroeconomic factors. We were hesitant about using modeled values with all the uncertainty that go into modeling. So this is current state, but with the idea that if there are annual updates, this could be updated, you know, whenever those updates come out.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
These are great questions.
Where does the other side of that, where's the other side of that taken into consideration in terms of, you know, heat island effect in the urban spaces in terms of, you know, greening and trees and green space?
Yeah, so we have one indicator that's low vegetative cover, and that's been mentioned in multiple heat vulnerability indices.
So that's the flip side of, that's the
kind
positive.
of the flip side, though. Agricultural land is not necessarily the same as vegetative cover. In addition to agricultural land, there's all sorts of different levels of tree canopy cover, shrubs, low density residential use, etc. So they're not actually inverses of each other. They are representing something slightly different. So we have low vegetative cover, and then of course we have vehicle and road density metrics that also get a kind of impervious surfaces and other contributors to the urban heat island effect.
this is kind of to the point of, we have this big list. A lot of these can serve or are trying to conceptually serve multiple functions. Agricultural land use is not just there for that. It's trying to look to the future and what it can cover. And I will point you to the document that Amanda and the team created of the considered indicators has some of those, reasons for rationale for inclusion versus, potential limitations and high priority for a future time. Does have some of this. It's written to be short because if not, it would be a long document. It already is big. But it does help to show kind of what we're thinking with certain things because not everything is a perfect proxy.
Is that just for the 45 indicators that we're looking at, or was that for all 150 or so that we started with?
It's for all of them. Yeah. So it's pretty long. So let's just let's find agricultural land down here. So you see here, it's shown as one of the highlighted indicators that we included. Just that really short statement about representing potential risk to agricultural productivity and rural and migrant population due to climate change. Similarly, a row for vegetative covers. And then everything not highlighted, these in white are all the indicators that we considered, but they were either redundant with something that had a better metric, a more accurate metric available, or data was not available at the level of granularity needed. And then, Amy, I think some of your questions might be answered in this heat vulnerability chapter that, goes through some of the literature of what's often included in heat vulnerability indices and shows how several of our variables are meant to stand in for heat vulnerability, recognizing that at this point, data isn't available for heat-related illnesses, hospitalization, or death, but we do have many correlates that are measures of, either the built or physical environment or population vulnerability to heat.
That reminds me, one thing I wanted to note here, one thing that we have done is actually veer away from using indices, and I think other screening tools use them. So, there's some income indices that, and by nature of being an index has multiple things feeding into it. But when you use those, you're blind. Say we use an income index, then you're blind to what's inside of that. You're just using that. And one of the things that Amanda recommended right from the beginning in terms of transparency was to actually go to the core things rather than the buttoned up ones. And so that is one of the reasons I think also we have more indicators is because we're not using indices that have, things that are invisible that are feeding into it. So anyway.
Right. So we did a lot of research on what indices were out there and took the components of them. So we kind of knew how they work, and we're not kind of duplicating, because you could have different indices like a social vulnerability index and a heat vulnerability index that actually have the same variable in them, but we wanted to include those separately. So we kind of understood how things are working. Other questions? I love how deep we're digging into this. Okay.
I'm going to ask the probing question of kind of the next step then. I mean, on our plate for us is to look at the correlates and see kind of, which of these indicators are bigger levers than others. But is there anything else, or are you feeling comfortable with this list trying to get us to that driving toward consensus, reducing the number of meetings that we want to do and have to do? If there are any big holes that you're seeing or things that you think are just redundant, or what would help you get to that decision?
For me, if we keep this list, if keeping this list means less meetings, I vote for keeping this list. And by the way, I mean vote, not in the formal sense. Brother's not trying to trigger open meetings law here. That was, never mind.
Noted, no worries.
Could you resend the list we were just looking at, the bigger indices list with all of that? I think that would be really helpful to be able to go through that and make a sound judgment on that.
Definitely, yeah.
Thank you.
Amy, were you talking about the spreadsheet or the list of 45?
The big spreadsheet.
Yeah.
Well,
I'm
there's
sure
a
we
Word,
have it, but
there's also a Word document that we prepared and emailed, and Rosa emailed it, I think, last week, that has all of this giant table in there, but it also has some, explanation around different components to it. You can always just jump straight to the table. I would urge you to look at that as opposed to the larger Excel list, because I think this is more readable and fine-tuned. This is also, frankly, kind of serving in terms of where we're going to go for documentation when this goes out for public comment. This is the format we'd like to take. So it's a good one for you to review for multiple reasons.
okay, this was the thing that at the beginning you asked if we looked at.
Yeah.
And several of us says we hadn't looked at it. So, okay.
Yeah, we'll recirculate the big document with the table.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, and Amy, I was going to say too, it's attached to the meeting invite that Rosa sent around. That's where I found
Thank you. Thank you, Rawa.
it. It's a great document.
Yeah, and to your question, Alex, as far I can't weigh in on it today, or at least I don't feel comfortable because I haven't had time to really review it. But 2 weeks time, we come back to this, I would feel more prepared at that point.
Okay. And feel free to send us questions at any time in that 2-week time so we can kind of prepare and plan out that time well.
And we know this is hard. It's a lot to volunteer your time for reviewing this, and then I'm going to make you look at maps today and then ask you to look for them later too. So with the recognition that we're asking a lot, part of the reason why we're veering toward more meetings was to make sure that this was happening so that we could kind of like do the homework while we're doing it together. But if there's a way that we can get your commitment to review some of these documents beforehand, come prepared with questions or email the questions beforehand, we can fine tune and reduce some of the meetings, at least in the amount of time for the meeting, AKA avoid a 3-hour meeting.
Great, thank you. Any other questions before we move on to looking at scenarios? Okay. I will hand it over to Alex.
Okay. So here's a recap. It feels like it was longer, but I think this was last week. We were looking at some maps, and every single time we do this, it might seem kind of frustrating or duplicative, but every single time we do this, it helps to trigger what we internalize what you're saying and then start thinking about ways of making sure that it's happening, and trying to understand what's really underlying things. So the biggest thing for us coming out of that meeting was this discussion or observation that there are some tracks that are coming out and looking like they have, they definitely have higher income than others, but they're still designated a DAC. And why is that? And what's going on there? And one of the reasons for that is that, we have the cake and eat it too scenario, right? We've got the statewide version where most of the DACs end up being in New York City, but a few happen outside of New York City. And those tend to be the ones with lower income. And then you have the statewide, the rest of state one, so the regional one, where we basically took out New York City and then saw where things lay and then overlaid that on top of the statewide one. So then it's the cake and eat it too scenario, which is a good way of doing it, but that's where the DACs that have higher income are showing up. And so we added this as an overlay, or at least a hover over, so that you can tell now where the designation came from. Did it come from the statewide model, or did it come from the regional model? And it really does show that well. The other thing we made a change in the map was to show the income metrics that are actually in the model. So we don't just have median income in the model, we have the percent less than 80 AMI, so area and median income. And then we have the percent less than 100% federal poverty line. Those are the two indicators for income that we have in the model right now. And so rather than having the, in the hover over the median income for that tract, we actually added these two so that you can see what's actually in the model there and see whether that's affecting things. One thing I will note though is that we haven't changed the weight of the indicators, the total indicators, any of those things, because we still need to kind of drill down into some of this, understanding of income, etc. Amanda, you want to go to the next slide? So here's the hover over. What you can see now is that we have this classified through, and then you've got the regional versus, and you'd either see regional or statewide there. Again, the regional ones will show higher income, or at least in those things. Then the metrics below, now we have less than 80% AMI and less than 100% federal poverty line there, so that you can start seeing those. And these are the percentage of the group in the tract. Is that a ranked percent, Amanda? Or is that total percent?
That's the total percent out of percentile.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So here is the hover over. The next thing I want to say, because we have to say it every time. I can't help myself. If you have the time, we're spending a lot of time in these meetings doing basic ground truthing, but also if you have the time, or if your staff have the time to go and add comments in, we look at every single comment. And what we look at, and here are some examples, what we look at here is if you disagree and say, well, this is higher income because it's gentrified, but I'm seeing these other things like a train station nearby, or we see that there could be a lot of Spanish speakers in this area or something else, then that tells us which levers are important for that DAC or that potential DAC. And frankly, it's going to help us do the tweaking that we need to do to the weighting. So yes, we'll have 45 or 40 or 38 indicators, but what we really need to do is figure out what matters more within these different models. Every single time that we've talked, income pops up, and so it seems to be a very, very important thing for us to be looking at. But what else is there? And so every single time we hear something of, oh, this is by a really big industrial park, that tells me that some of those place-based threats, burdens, whatever you want to call them, are also going to be an important factor into this. The flip side is also that agreeing with us, if you go back, it shouldn't be a DAC because things have been renovated or there's a park there. That tells us that green space. So that tells us we're trying to get at that urban heat island, and vegetative cover or lack of vegetative cover is important, that kind of thing. So just another plug, if you have time, add more. Mostly it's just that since we're building this from the ground up with trying to build it with your perspectives in mind, the more data we can have in that group of seeing, oh, this track, this track, this track. So if you add data in for 20 different tracks around the areas that you live in or that you know of, and you can help go through that, then that's 20 data points that we then have that we didn't have before to look at. And that helps us fine tune this. Without it, we would have just submitted this one scenario already. But clearly we got it wrong in some areas, right? So that's what we're trying to do, is fix those areas we got it wrong. but keep the places where we got it right. Amanda, you wanted to talk about zooming out and kind of looking at the larger picture. Oh yeah, Eddie, go.
Hi. Quick question. I don't know if this is the case with everyone else. After I did my initial ground truthing, I've been frankly afraid to go back because like how many census tracts are we talking about, right? Just in New York City alone, how many census? Like I don't go back because I'm afraid of that DAC rabbit hole. You know what I'm saying? I may never come back for a single climate justice working group meeting if I just do this. How many census? Over 4,000? Is that what you said, Jared?
Yeah.
That number's popping out. I thought it was over 4,000.
It is.
Yo,
it's a lot.
So like any advice on the strategic examination so we can forget reducing 45 indicators? Can we reduce the 4,000 census tracts to something manageable that we can? I'm sorry, but that sounded real. Like that's why I've been afraid to go back, because I just get overwhelmed when I see the sheer number of census tracts. So yeah, sorry.
I appreciate that. It's really overwhelming. It is not a simple thing. Like we try to simplify it and make it as easy as possible, but what we're asking you to do is a big thing. And it's not that we care necessarily of you covering those 400 or 4,000, but maybe it is that you're looking at 20 different census tracts. And it might be that you don't know all of the area around it, but that you can kind of look through the satellite photos, or you can kind of get a sense of where things fall. Even if it's 10, it's helpful. And Eddie, we'll go to your neighborhood and look through, and I'll explain how we can try to make it a little easier for you. One of the reasons why I think it might be easier is that we have now the colors so that you can agree or disagree, right? So before it was like this just blank, set of tracks, and then you had to give us the information, and then we tried to match it and make our model, like optimize our model to that. And now you have another layer above it, which is something to react to, of like, oh no, you totally have it wrong, Alex, what are you thinking? Or, hey, that's right, I agree with you. And telling us.
Yeah, the other thing is, we really do need to build up the number of things that are right that we agree with. So, in optimizing, we're not actually moving away from generally something that works. So just going in and clicking and saying, yes, I agree. Yes, I agree. That would be helpful too. Because, just knowing what's wrong, we could start to create a model that gets away from, the core DAC concept.
I have a quick question. I think most of us recognize it's probably not realistic for 9 volunteer group members to cover 4,000 census tracts. So is there like a percentage or a number that you're shooting for this to be like statistically significant? Or
we're not even going there. I mean, honestly, because that's just not feasible. What it helps us do, and this is where that qualitative data, the comments can help really a lot too, is to just be like, if you know of an area in New York and you feel comfortable there, then search for that street block and then zoom out a little bit. And then we can work through that. So we're gonna actually do that in a few minutes. And so let's just do it together and then we can figure it out. But if you give us information on 10 tracks, that's helpful. Anything is helpful.
Alex, can I clarify one thing? I think it's a point of clarification. So about our discussion from last meeting, and income is, bubbling up is an important thing. From my perspective, the concern is less about including tracks that have higher income. That's not so much what I'm concerned about. My concern was that it seemed to be that there were some lower income tracks that were getting left out. So, yeah, I just wanted to make that distinction.
Yeah, it's a good distinction to have. And I think one of the things then is like, how can we adjust either income or other things in the score to bump those tracks that are lower income into the DAC as opposed to the other one? that's the balance point, right? So whether it's a, you know, a filter for income, or whether it's us making, you know, a certain factor weigh more heavily in our final model, that's what's important for us. So, you know, how we get there isn't necessarily as important as what you just said, Abby, which is you're worried that we're leaving out some DACs that are lower income and you don't understand why, as opposed to some that are higher income but might have other threats, place-based threats or something in there that are pushing them in. So how do we balance that? Did I hear that right?
Yes, you did.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, it's just like a fine-tuning science, right? Like, I don't know if anyone else has done it this way, where we're going beyond the theory and going into this like lived-in experience of things, and then really trying to test it out, and then trying to fine-tune a model to make it fit that, right? That's a bit of a backward way from how things are usually built, but I think it will make a better model. It does require, to Eddie's point, feeling overwhelmed sometimes of wanting to go back in there or not, or fighting that feeling. So hopefully we'll push through that and talk through that. And Eddie, come back to me if you still feel overwhelmed. Then we got to make a new plan, because the idea here is like get that input, and we're hoping to extract it in some of these meetings so that you don't have to do it on your own. It's part of this. But I also think if you can do it on your own, that's great too.
Quick question, Alex, Amanda. Do you have the capability to track which census tracts have been ground truth through the map? What I'm seeing is like as this process develops and grows and things are tweaked and modified, like to Abby's point, if she was looking at the census tract that was not included and then a change was made, it'd be helpful like for the group members to be able to go back to those exact census tracts to see if it is now actually included as a DAC, and to like test whether or not those changes are like being reflected.
Yeah, we've been talking about overlaying those as dots, because you know you can't add more color to an area and things like that. But if we overlaid a dot and said like, you know, this has been looked at, so it's bright red or green or whatever it is, then it can be kind of a way for you to see it.
Yeah, a visual cue would be way easier. It's a good idea.
Okay. Yeah, that's cool. Okay, you want to go to the next slide?
Yeah, so what I'm thinking, looking at the time, we did want to give you a break from looking at the super detailed zoom in, but we do need to do some zoom in today. So what we wanted to do is kind of a different exercise here, kind of zooming out, looking at regions overall. Then maybe we can take a break and then get back to zooming in, because we have been just going in so far. So we wanted, here's just a picture of the zoom out, but you can't really tell that much from the zoom out because you can't see what's going on in some more urban areas. So a while ago, we showed some tables that show within each region what percentage of the region gets classified as a DAC. So we wanted to show you in this scenario where we are today, again, not, you know, we haven't changed a lot in response to some prior discussions. We haven't changed a lot to focus more on income, but we just want to show you as, you know, one stake in the ground of one potential scenario, how things look regionally. So, you know, this is just the map of the Economic Development Council regions you're probably familiar with, and the table on the right, you've seen versions of this show within each of these regions what percentage of the tracts in this current scenario, which is again kind of a draft scenario we're still working on, end up being classified as DACs. So I think the first thing to look at is that bottom row, which is saying that overall across the state, 35% of all of the census tracts are designated as DACs. But this does range from region to region. So New York City is the highest, where 47% of all census tracts are currently classified as DACs. And then you see a lot of places are kind of in the 20 to 30% range. And the lowest here right now is Long Island, where about 9% of census tracts are classified as DACs. So we really just wanted to share this and see what your, kind of initial reactions are. Does this make sense? Based on what you know of these different regions.
I'm taking a both. I don't know if this is a step back or a sideways step, but the numbers look, at least for New York City, it sounds about right to me. But just out of curiosity, on this call, I'm on the Climate Justice Working Group. Am I the only person from New York City? Wow. Okay. Yeah. I'm just asking the rest of my colleagues across the state. Be mindful that like I'm the only one here, kind of holding it down for New York City. So be kind, is all I'm saying. Keep going, guys. Sorry.
I don't even know what that means, Eddie. Now I feel like there's an inclination to be unkind to you for no reason. I'm just kidding.
So in this sense, the breakdown that we've got here is, just shy of half of the tracts in New York City are designated a DAC. But when you get down to the capital region, it's just slightly over a quarter of the census tracts are designated a DAC. And so if you're looking at and thinking about these regions, how does that feel for you in the ones that you're at? With the recognition, we have no one here from Long Island. And so we're trying to make sure that you're going to see a lot of us calling out in the several slides that we're calling out Long Island, just because we feel like it got a little lost. But also it might be that 9% is appropriate.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm from Long Island. And, I think Long Island is one of those, areas that obviously, has pockets of great wealth. It's also suffering from, some real climate change issues in terms of flooding and, tremendous damage, long-lasting damage because of that, erosion. And so I think it's an interesting conundrum in terms of the intersection of, climate and community. And certainly not all of Long Island is a high wealth or even medium wealth. There are definitely disadvantaged communities all across Long Island.
Yeah, for the North Country, my gut reaction is that seems low, but I'm not sure exactly how to test that at this point.
Yeah, I think that does come back to ground truthing and kind of, going in saying, okay, what is my expectation? I'm going to go in and look at the North Country. What is my expectation of areas I would want to see as a DAC? Get that in your mind and then kind of go in and see if those tracks are covered.
Yeah, that's, well, I mean, that has been happening already. I wouldn't say I'm going into it with an expectation of what should be there, or just an objective observer of what I see up there, but it still seems low.
I think this is, the North Country in particular kind of calls this out, and it's a little bit in contrast to, say, Long Island, in the sense of the North Country's got a lot of vegetative cover, and, so it's less on the place-based threats, burdens area. Right. And so this is, again, one of those places where it's kind of noting on a grander scale, the ground truthing of that feels low makes us think, well, maybe some of the population-based criteria might need to be emphasized more.
But I'm wondering if that's something that's going on too, is that there just isn't a lot of population in the North Country, if that's somehow reflecting in what we're seeing here.
That could be a lot of it too.
On a similar note, I think on a past version of this, maybe you showed us not only percentages of designated DACs in the region, but also absolute number. And I'm thinking that would be helpful to see, like, if we go and present this to the public, for example, to have both, because looking at the difference between Western New York's percentage and Finger Lakes percentage, I'm surprised to see that they're so different, but I wonder if that's just because they have fewer DACs or fewer census tracts overall. So anyway.
Yeah. We have a table for that. Amanda, you want to go to the next? Is it next or is it the one after that?
We don't have the counts in here though. That's
No,
to add.
but we do have the percent that shows the percent of DACs. We have a.
Yeah. That kind of shows the relative. So this is.
There you go.
I'll try to explain this, bear with me, but let's look at these two columns. So the column on the left is what you're interested in. That kind of sizes how big the region is compared with the state. So in the first column, it says that Western New York makes up 7% of the census tracts in New York, and the Finger Lakes is 6% of the census tracts in New York. So Western New York has slightly more census tracts, but not a huge difference.
Okay, that's really interesting, actually. Thank you.
It looks like Randy I can't see the comment that she posted. Can someone read what Randy posted?
Yeah, Western New York is the start of the Erie Canal and therefore more industry. There may be more environmental burdens.
Yeah, so maybe, industrial or manufacturing land use as well as air toxics from facilities in that area or other, historical facilities.
I can also just speak to like parts of Western New York, in particular, the urban core that has an incredible amount of poverty, obviously also our proximity to continued pollution with the Peace Bridge and other kinds of issues, a ton of brownfields and Superfund sites around Western New York. There's also the leaking, what do you call it, in the Great Valley, the radiation waste disposal site. When you look at Niagara County, again, very similar post-industrial pollution, brownfields, levels of poverty, unemployment, redlining, so on and so forth. And then in some of the rural communities, it's a lack of access to infrastructure.
Okay.
So Rawa, thinking about that, then, and you look at, say, nearly 40% of the DACs in the Western region are designated. Sorry, 40% of the tracts. We got to come up with something other than track and DAC here. I'm never going to be able to say it right. But does that feel right? So about 40% of the area is going to be designated a DAC in this scenario, or it would be designated a DAC.
Yeah, I think without having done a deeper dive, that sounds about right to me.
Cool. We just ground truth a little bit, and it was hopefully less painful than making you look at every single 4,000 tracks that we have. But stay tuned. I think we're probably all ready for a break. And then, Rosa, how long do you want?
Let's come back at 2:45. It's about 12 minutes.
Okay, then beware, we're going to go to the maps. Go there. So stay tuned. 12 minutes.
All right, we are at 2:45 and everyone should be making their way back to the meeting. Looks like Alex has our map popping up. All right, Alex, when you're ready, we are back.
I finally got to the little room in the library. I now understand the lack of infrastructure in rural parts of the country without internet. Rural Minnesota, feeling that. Okay, so we're going through the map. Can you all see the map? So one of the things I wanted to do is try to go through a place where you think is environmentally vulnerable, and to, you know, that they have environmental threats. They have this place-based area that you feel, if something happened climate-wise, would be in big trouble or have a really tough time. It doesn't necessarily have to be your area, but just trying to shake things up a little bit and start in a different place. Do any of you have any thoughts on where that could be?
I mean, it's not my region, but with some coastal area.
Okay, let's go to the coast. I'm going to zoom in a little bit more so we can see some specific parts here. I'm going to select a few of these so that we can see what's going on. Uh-oh. Oh, there we go. Okay. So in this case, we've got only one area that was designated a DAC, and it has a higher percentage of less than 80% area median income. Similar, if I were to probably, the percent of the burden percentile, so that is the place-based area, is 60, as opposed to some of the others, which is in the 40s and 50s. The vulnerability percentile, so those are the people-based scores, is actually not as high as some of the others. None of these are considered PJA, and then percent BIPOC is still pretty low.
Do you know what town that is?
Yeah, let me go and unclick this, and then we can zoom in a little bit more. Oh, bother. Too many tools that don't work in conjunction.
And are you saying that's the only DAC designated on Long Island?
Oh, no, there are many more. This is just
okay.
in this zoomed in spot. Sorry, didn't mean to, to make that sound pretty scary. Okay, let's see here. So it's in Suffolk County. And here we've got, oh, that's going to zoom in too far. I'm not seeing a town name here.
Sayville, I think it's saying West Sayville, Oakdale.
Doesn't it say Oakdale? Yeah, Oakdale.
Does it say Oakdale? Where does it say Oakdale?
The place name.
Oh, yeah, there we go. Place name, Oakdale. As opposed to West Sayville and Oakdale, another part of Oakdale.
I don't know anything about Oakdale. Can you go to Nassau County?
Yep. Okay. It is interesting to us when we added in the vulnerabilities and the flooding and things like that. These did not pop right away here in the way that we thought they would. I think because it's, other scores are not hitting quite as big of a factor. But you've got Freeport Village that is considered a DAC, several areas there. There you go. Let me zoom into that area because then you'll know it. And we'll see how it feels to you. What I'm noticing is that this is a higher industrial area right here.
I would think Freeport, Roosevelt, Hempstead.
So within this area, there's 1, 2, 3, 4 places that are designated a DAC, surrounded by several that are not. And let's see here. Go down to the ones that are. There's one that was designated a DAC based on the statewide model. And then the rest of them here are from the regional model. Pretty high percentage of AMI, lower than 80% AMI. The burden percentile, again, that place-based one, for some of them are higher than others, but it's not out of the norm of this region, but it is much higher on the people-based side of things. So we're starting to see a balance here. If you want to compare and contrast this tract right here that I'm hovering over, 53% AMI. This is not a DAC in the current model. The burden percentile is 47. The vulnerabilities of the people-based is 69. It is considered a PIJA. 92% BIPOC. And then here, in contrast, you've got these right here that are considered a DAC. 47 again percentile for this one right here. In contrast, oh wait, no, yeah, 47. Then the vulnerability people-based one is 64. So this is, Amanda, I think this is interesting here. This right here is considered a DAC in the regional model with these percentiles, but this one is not, even though it has a higher vulnerability percentile.
Yeah, that is interesting.
That doesn't seem like it quite right. Yeah, I'm gonna figure out which one this is. And if Amanda, can you monitor comments so that I can, because this is taking my whole screen.
Sure, yeah, I'm gonna take a screenshot of this too.
Okay. So I love this. Every single time we look at these, we see these slight inconsistencies. To me, this one actually seems like a calculation error, because this shouldn't happen. If these two are lower or the same than this one, then what is it that's not pushing this one forward as a DAC? Okay. You got a screenshot, Amanda?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Can
Zooming
you,
back.
sorry, can you remind me again what the less than 100% FPL column is? What is FPL?
That's the less than 100% federal poverty line.
Okay, thank you.
It's a it's a harder, I would say, because it's harder to, there's just a small number, it isn't as good of an instrument or indicator as the 80% AMI.
And Alex, the burden indicator, that's all combined, all of the indicators together as a combination?
Yeah, for the place-based stuff. So there's 3 different factors within that larger burden percentile that feed into that. So we'll want to look at what those individual scores are in that. And so that's on us to try to tease apart where the flip side is that this one is not being considered a DAC as opposed to this one.
So just to go back to the Long Island question in general, given erosion and, flooding and hurricanes and all the things that are impacting the coasts there, it doesn't seem like that is popping up on these indicators around Long Island necessarily.
Yeah, I think some are, but some are not. And to your point, like it's not as clear as every single one of these. If we were just looking at those areas, then these should all be high. They should be bigger, and they're not. And so, or they should be designated a DAC, right, with all the flooding that could potentially happen in this area.
I mean, I think, I'm guessing it's being overshadowed by the income issue, which, that does make sense. That, incomes are high in most of those communities. I guess the question is, how do you balance that in terms of the climate issue?
Yeah.
And the other thing I want to point out, and this is exactly why we want to talk about this today, our burdens indicator includes all of the environmental exposures and environmental burdens as well. So all of the air toxics and industrial facilities, history of redlining, et cetera. And right now, in general, the combination of all of those environmental concerns, whether exposures, facilities, burdens, is generally weighted more than the climate variables. And so that's something we haven't really discussed before. How should we be weighing or considering environmental burdens, historical exposures, historical burdens with these emerging threats of climate change?
That's the other thing about Long Island out on the East End. The historic agriculture out there, there are very high cancer rates because of agriculture and the density of population. And I don't know that I'm seeing that show up.
And
Yeah.
just a couple of quick comments about this. One is, that's true, Amy. I wonder though, when you talk about the higher incidences of cancer, are those for people who live, in the surrounding area, or people who work there? Because I imagine that the workers in agriculture are probably the ones that are, the ones more exposed to, toxicants and stuff like that. So, do you know if
historically, Eddie, it's been the population also that lives there. Eastern Long Island had at one point had the highest breast cancer rates, I think, in the country. So there is a history of really high cancer rates out there.
And no, thanks for that. And I think the other thing, and I've apologies for beating a dead horse. That's not the best environmental analogy, but at the risk of being repetitive, I just want to remind folks that even though a community, and this is not to speak to what Amy just said, because actually a much different question. But when we're talking about just climate vulnerabilities, like vulnerability to storm surges and flooding and the rest, without factoring in the more troubling statistics like Amy just did. Let's remember that we're trying to steer the 40% to disadvantaged communities. So communities, in other words, that have climate vulnerabilities that are subject to all these other climate change impacts, even though they may not get a DAC, they still have the access to the 60% of the rest of the funding, right? So the idea is to try to get the 40% to communities that for all of the 45 reasons, all the other indicators we presume are communities that may have more difficulty accessing the funding, accessing the political attention, or whatever. Having said all that, I'm just it sounds like we're already doing this, Alex. So apologies if I feel like I'm rushing or whatever. But when I look at a census tract that's 92% people of color and 47% burdens, like I'm also wondering why would that not be a DAC? And so I'm just curious, like, do you have a sense of what some of those other factors that might be driving, or is that what you're trying to figure out? And I should just let you do your work.
Well, no, that's why we're trying to figure that out. I think that one is a real doozy of a question. I have a feeling because we have, Amanda, correct me if I'm wrong, things aren't buttoning up just to the burden percentile and the vulnerability percentile. So there's subscores in there, and it might be that one of those is driving something. But this, I mean, I think we can all agree, feels like it should be a DAC, right? So should be a DAC. Okay.
I mean, this is where our multiple variables come into play. We have 23 vulnerability variables. 2 of them are income and 1 of them is BIPOC. That leaves 20 other variables that are driving things. Some of them are correlated to income, but income and BIPOC is just one piece of that vulnerability score. So that's where it comes down to, well, should we try to pare this down a little bit?
What town is this census tract that you're examining?
It's the one from your neck of the woods. Let me get back there.
Freeport. Yeah.
That is Freeport?
Let's see, where were we? There we are. Yeah. So just submitted that. Yeah, I think that one's worth looking into. I do think also that this is, Eddie brought it up, I was going to talk through this too. It's like the balance point for us here, the real critical thing, and that this is a decision you all need to make, not us. We can guide you with some of the recommendations and things, but how much do you want to weigh the relative importance of these various things? Is it that we want to find the vulnerable communities that are going to be vulnerable to climate, but are less able to respond given their current economic and kind of demographic situations, that they are more kind of vulnerable, and therefore that should be designated a DAC? Because it's kind of like a 2 variable problem in this case. We've got the burdens, those place-based burdens, and we have, a continuum of the tracks of how burdened they are in the place-based kind of economic indicators, or not economic, environmental. And then we've got this other overlay on it, which is the people in those areas and how able are they to respond. So that is the real question.
I mean, I totally agree with Eddie that, we should be looking at how to, push the resources to folks who are less able to, rally on their own or get attention for the issues in the communities.
Yeah. So then we're going to try to strike that balance, but I think that every time we look at this map, we find a funny little thing. And frankly, I think even if we, perfect everything, we're still going to find those funny little things, because no definition that we ever create is going to be perfect, but getting it as close as possible is my goal for this. So to that end, I would like to bump out to another spot that you think could be environmental place-based burden, and we can go look there. And if it's in the North Country or up anywhere around the Finger Lakes, any place. Okay, I'm going to take us in a funky little spot right along a river. Does anyone know anything about the Hudson area? Mid-Hudson, Ulster?
Little bit.
I know it's hard to look at places that you don't know about, but we can, do basically kind of the same thing where we're zooming in, trying to look at a neighborhood and see what distinguishes these different ones. And then I'm also just going to select a few spots here so that we can look at a little bit of the detail. So most of these I'll point out are coming from the regional model. There are 3 that are not considered a DAC here. Most of them are lower income, higher poverty areas.
I was surprised to see so many DACs in this region, to be honest.
Yeah, so these all look like they, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, Amy, so can you tell me more, any thoughts on why you were surprised?
Certainly there is some rural poverty in this area. And there, are a couple of pockets, Poughkeepsie is a particular pocket of, urban concerns and both poverty and, has environmental, urban issues. But I was surprised to see so many, because that's just not been my exposure to this area. I haven't seen or experienced it that way. And I mean, I have spent a fair amount of time in the Mid-Hudson.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we don't have a huge agreement on all of these as far as the percent PIJA here either. But what I would say is some of this is coming from riverine flooding data. Amanda, correct me if I'm wrong, but some of these popped up because of the riverine flooding that we pulled in.
Can you scroll down so we can see the full list? Just curious how they're broken up between region and state designation.
And there may be industrial facilities in there too. We'd have to really zoom in and look at what some of the land use is in this area. And generally they're coming up as higher burden percentiles than the areas we were looking at on Long Island.
One thing I will say here that you can see pretty consistently, not totally, but you're seeing double digits of the less than 100% federal poverty line in the statewide models. So there's probably a lot more poverty there. There's a higher percentage of PIJA groups, census blocks.
For the LIMP team, you mentioned riverine flooding. Is that a vulnerability or a historical? Are we talking about in a historical context?
That is actually a forecast.
Okay.
So based on the changes in sea level and how that changes clouds number.
And it is one of the place-based burden ones. So it would go in the burden score, not the vulnerability score.
But I mean, we were just talking about Long Island, where there's tremendous flooding, and you've seen, there's been the impact from that, long-term impact from that. That's why I was bringing up Long Island, not because I think, we should be calling them DACs, but like, you know, how is that impacting other areas? You know, certainly flooding is impacting so many areas. You know, the capital region has been flooded out. Most of our rivers and creeks have overflowed, but you know, I guess I don't know how that trickle down effect is occurring in terms of this data.
Yeah. Well, and that's what gets tricky and really tough about when you have this many indicators, and also not just the indicators, but just the fact that different regions have different issues, right? So in Long Island, the biggest issue is, you know, flooding. And in that case, I don't know, like that is probably being minimized because it has lower scores for all these other indicators that are in that burden score, as Amanda said. Whereas in here, if you look at the Hudson area, the riverine flooding is popping things over, but they also have higher, probably industrial areas and things like that, that are pushing them over. And so you're getting a higher proportion here as opposed to Long Island.
Yes, you know, just looking at this list, we have so many different types of industrial facilities here. So essentially right now, because we didn't really weight things strongly at the beginning, flooding has the same weight as, say, scrap metal processors or municipal waste combustors. And it's just so hard to figure out how to weigh, you know, environmental burdens with climate change. And just want to start discussing that.
Welcome to our headachy, crazy world.
Yeah, that's a tough question for sure. There's so many scenarios that you could lay out for the future. I mean, that's one of the advantages of our species, is being able to scenario plan, but there are so many variabilities to take into account. Like, yeah, that's a tough one.
Yeah. There's no one solution that's going to solve everything here, but I think finding a relative balance where we start looking at, you know, okay, well, clearly there are more places in Long Island that probably should be identified, at least as climate vulnerable. And, you know, so then it's kind of like fine tuning for that area. If we fix that area, what does that do to the rest? And does it minimize things? And
so, sorry, Alex, I mean to cut you off.
Yeah, go for it. No, you go.
Yeah, so a question about, you know, using projections to make that designation. Is your team looking at, you know, forecasts that are 10 years out, 20 years out, 50 years out? I mean, what kind of modeling is coming into play with this, and what are the, you know, timelines and horizons?
Yeah, Amanda, for the riverine, is it 50 years?
I think it's actually, so there's
2050?
two things to balance. It's what the time frame is and whether you're assuming a low, moderate, or high emission scenario. So in this case, I think it was 2100, but a moderate emissions scenario. We can double check on that. And that was, you know, a decision that Department of State, NYSERDA, and some other climate modelers were involved in making.
Okay. So what is the justification behind a moderate scenario as opposed to worst case scenario?
I think it's just uncertainty and not wanting, you know, it's already introducing a lot of uncertainty to use modeled variables. In general, we're not using that many modeled variables. So, you know, weighing that desire to forecast with uncertainty.
By uncertainty, that error is what I would call it, is that as you kind of go to the more extreme potential ones, you're introducing a lot more error into that model, just for that one indicator, which then introduces more error into the overall model. So going with a moderate one, I think is actually the right choice here. But I think that what it tells me is that across the state, different environmental factors are going to affect places differently. And how do we deal with that?
But back to Eddie's question, in terms of like how we're weighing the communities most in need of these resources, you know, so I'm pulling up some of these designated DACs in the mid-Hudson Valley.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, like I'm looking at one right now that has a median income $98,000. Like, what? You know?
Is that a DAC?
But it's designated as a DAC. Its burden percentile is 73. Its vulnerability percentile is 51. But its median income is 98,000.
Well, this goes to a point, Amy, it's like you planted it. We wanted to talk about income and how do we deal with income? Do we make sure that there is a ceiling for, say, percent AMI, so less than 80% AMI, or, you know, or for median income, that we put in a ceiling where there are certain areas that if your median income is 98,000, then you're not a DAC, in essence. So it's almost like it goes through this whole model, and then we put a filter on at the end to make sure that we're not including higher income areas. That is an option that we were thinking about, at least in the sense of trying to understand a way to make sure that we're covering a balance of things, but still incorporating income as a very important factor.
Yeah, thanks for that, Alex. I'm struggling with this too, because my gut or my instinct is you know, goes in that same direction as you, that maybe we need to be a little more rigid when it comes to the income stuff. But the thing that keeps holding me back from like just saying, of course we have to do that, is I'm trying to remember when I saw the last study, but there have been studies over the years that have shown when you do some comparisons, I think it's maybe at the national level, but if you do some comparisons, even when you control you know, stuff like income, that and I think this is specifically in African American communities, that African American communities will find themselves environmentally overburdened, even when compared to lower income white communities. And I don't remember where to put my hands on that study. So studies, I think there was more than one. So that's why like the race factor is always something that we can't overlook, because how does one account for that? Like, you know, a middle income Black community could in fact be environmentally overburdened more so than a working class white community, right? In fact, what this is playing out in real time in New York City. There's a homeowner community in Southeast Queens that's fighting to stop a bill that's going to restore transfer station capacity to a waste transfer station in their community. These are like, you know, it's a middle income Black community, but it's still the fourth most environmentally overburdened when it comes to transfer stations in New York City. So yeah, so I hear you, Alex. Like, I think that there is maybe we need to emphasize a little more the income side of things. It's just that lingering statistic and that comparison is what's giving me pause.
Yeah, I think the example that Rawa shared with a burden score of 73 is worth looking into. That very well might be a community that is more environmentally burdened with many types of facilities.
Are you talking about Amy?
Oh, was that Amy who found the 98,000 community with a 73 burden score?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Eddie, to your point, I think that it is really important for us to be considering kind of the interaction between income and race. which we have in the model, but if we add a filter, then it's something that we should discuss and try to work through. I'm trying to find, now that we don't have median income on this current model one, it's harder to actually see where that one is as far as visual.
Amy, do you know the tract number or something if you wanted to paste that into the chat?
For the one I had been looking at?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, shoot.
It's all good. The idea is
now I'm like floating all around the state because now I'm like so into this.
Right? Once you get into it, it's dangerous.
And I think
that I was curious, like what median income was around other parts of the state. I mean, in the capital region, it's like $27,000. So, like, I mean, 98,000 seemed crazy high, but it's like.
This is where one of those indices actually, if anything, just to kind of show you not that it's in the model, but it shows you kind of like the cost of living and it balances things out would help, right? You have the median income, but if rent and food and everything else costs X amount more, then.
Yeah, so I jumped to New York City because I was like, okay, so what about cost of living? So I jumped to New York City and I'm seeing, 36,000, whatever. And then I just saw a DAC in New York City that's like $100,000. And I'm like, well, wait a minute.
Yeah, they range. I mean, and that's one of the things that I think is important to acknowledge. Like, there's definitely a range and it's not a small range as far as income. You see quite a lot that vary across this. So
I think that's, we talked a little bit about median income itself. I mean, it is a median, so 50% of people are below it, but within that 50% who are below, you could have 50% of people right below 98,000, or you could have 50% of people below 20,000, right? So looking at the percentage who are below 80% or the percentage of the below the federal poverty line might give us a better sense of where to draw these lines. So we're careful not to exclude anywhere that still has a high percentage of very low income households. Thanks, Eddie, for this study. We will look at that.
So what I'm thinking.
Amanda, I'm sorry. I just gave you the census tract, Amanda, for the.
Oh, okay. Oh, great. Let's look.
What's
Alex,
the number?
do you see that? Okay, are you ready to type it in?
I'm ready.
360270704001. That should be in Dutchess.
Oh, are you not gonna?
60270704001.
Yeah, it won't let me search by census tract.
How about Dutchess?
Okay, let's do Dutchess.
So, a big area.
It's if you go up to Dutchess. It's in Dutchess. No, go down. Sorry, go down.
There we go. Okay.
Yeah, Fairview. Not that one. Fairview.
Wait, yeah, that one.
Okay.
Yeah, let's zoom in on that.
Okay, I'm just going to. Oh, bother. So select everything around it. With the recognition that this is it.
It's the one ending in 401. Maybe we selected too much.
Yeah, you can select. There it is. Okay. Wait, no, that's 101, 401. Here we go. So 36% have AMI less than 80%. 7% are below the poverty level. Burden score, so that's the environmental one, is 67. Vulnerability is 48, which seems low. 31% BIPOC, 38% PIJA. So I think it's a good one to kind of talk through and say, basically, I don't think that is a DAC.
Yeah, and then, it's on us if we wanted to look into it to say what are the environmental burdens feeding into this. So, asking that question, what's driving this high burden score?
Oh, wait, I did the wrong one. So, Eddie, are you getting punchy? Do you want to talk?
I'm hitting the coffee as we speak, Alex.
Well, I was going to say, so what you guys have just done has actually been extraordinarily helpful. And I think we have gone for 2.5 hours. If you're hitting a wall, if we're all hitting a wall, that's okay. We can be done. Because I've extracted what we wanted in this case. And there's a couple things that I do want to talk through in this case. So we talked about some kind of income filter, though we want to think about interaction with race. Abby's feeling the wall too. Yeah, I think we're all there. I'm going to stop sharing so that we can just be together without seeing anything. But there are a couple things that I think are really important for us to work through, right? And one is trying to figure out this balance of income with everything else. So I think we all agree higher income doesn't necessarily always indicate that it's not a DAC, but if you're higher income, you should be less likely. On average, you should not be a DAC because you have the wherewithal to withstand a climate emergency better than those that are more vulnerable or burdened or both. The other thing that we talked about, which I want us to investigate, is how certain areas, like if we think about Long Island as opposed to other areas, flooding is a bigger environmental issue and burden than other areas. And when you have a whole list of different burdens, how does an area that is especially susceptible to one get counted and integrated in there? So we need to be thinking about that. Those are non-trivial things for Amanda and me and team to go and bounce our heads on. Amanda, is there anything else?
I think we can be at this wall and stop here and move to the next topic. This is great.
We're going to tear down those walls, Eddie. Okay.
You know it's bad when I'm quoting Reagan. Sorry. The one thing I would just I'm like I said, my inclination is to think that the income piece should matter more. I continue to be just nervous about these studies that have shown that race in some ways are even more indicative of burdens than income. If I get it, Rosa, if I get and believe me, I know nobody wants to plow through a 20 or 30 page academic study. Rosa, if I find some synopsis of these studies or an article or two, could I try for you to share it with the rest of the gang if I forward it to you after this call?
We will share them.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, Alex, keep going.
Oh, I'm going to plow through that study, and I actually think it's really important, Eddie. We do have to find a balance there because you're right. There's a lot of systemic racism that has created, basically a means for making it much, much tougher for people of color to respond to things, even if they have the income to do it. So how we do that matters. So we'll keep that in mind. I think that on our plate now is to try to start thinking about how to deal with these different regional vulnerabilities, burdens, the place-based regional kind of composition of things. Where are the threats more for different places? And then how do we factor or mitigate and make sure that we're not over capturing groups or places that have more wherewithal. So let's take income out of it, but they just have more wherewithal to be able to respond to climate change, whereas others are not. Okay. I'm going to share the PowerPoint and let's see, share. As far as next steps, we can briefly go through the public process that we want to go through. Amanda, did you want to cover this?
I think Alana was going to cover this.
Yep, Alana, go for it. You
I
might
think
be
you're
muted.
still on mute, Alana. Yeah.
Hey, it's Rosa. I can start if Alana is going to jump on in a second. So I think this was,
Sorry, I'm back.
we wanted to, okay, here we go.
I had to go
All right, so Alana, go ahead and you can reintroduce yourself.
Sure. Hi, everybody. Alana Cadell-Tucky. I'm the Public Outreach Specialist for the Office of Environmental Justice. And I wanted to talk quickly about what the public process is going to look like going forward. So, sorry. I have a lot of stairs in my house, and I had to run downstairs quickly. It's 3 flights. I just ran back up. So I'm a little winded, and I apologize in advance. So what we're going to start with, after everybody has voted and we've released the draft indicators and criteria to the public, that's going to start the 120-day comment period. Somewhere in there, the goal is to start this entire public hearing process with some public educational sessions. So the goal is to have a few of these sessions that will be recorded. So definitely have live sessions, but definitely have a few of these recorded so that those who can't get on the session at the time when it's live will at least have an opportunity to view the session. We'll have it located on the climate website, on DEC's YouTube page, on our environmental justice page. The goal is to have that available so folks can get a rundown, have an opportunity to hear what the process was going, and then we can go to the public hearing. So they'll have that information in hand moving forward to the public hearings. Does anybody have any questions about that? Nope. Okay.
Alana?
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry, and maybe it's later in your presentation. And if so, at some point, could you speak to what you guys or what we envision, how the Climate Justice Working Group will actually hold these hearings? Because you guys on government side do that all the time. From our side, we're used to being on the other side of the table. So,
right.
any advice you can give both in terms of how you guys think that can unfold, and secondly, how to ignore those troubling advocates that are always complaining. Oh, never mind, that's us. Keep going.
Oh, those pesky advocates. Yes. Well, when we get to the public hearing aspect, as we all know, there has to be at least a minimum of 6 public hearings. We could always schedule additional hearings, a minimum of 3 in the upstate area and 3 downstate. For DEC, our public hearing process is that we have an administrative law judge who's there to sort of gavel in and gavel out the session and make sure that the session is recorded. We'll have sort of a brief, this is how we're seeing it, and anybody can feel free to jump in if they have a problem. The goal is to have a brief sort of introduction, again, to the issue, to the process, nothing too long, because we don't want to take away sorry, I'm saying echo. Don't want to take away from the public's opportunity to comment, and then we'll go sort of straight to the public comments, trying to give everybody at least 3 to 5 minutes to comment on the documents or on the process in general. For the group members, it might if this public hearing is happening near you, you could be there to answer questions, but I think the best option for the Climate Justice Working Group is to be more heavily involved in the educational sessions. Since the public hearing, we don't we try not to do as much presenting and as much talking during the public hearing to give the public an opportunity to speak.
That's great news.
So we're not limited to the number of education sessions. The goal obviously is to, they might even run concurrently with a couple of these public hearings, but we definitely want to make sure that, people have an opportunity to communicate with you guys, and you have an opportunity to interact with the public. And everybody basically gets the information that they need to have in order to make informed comments. Additionally, through the 120-day comment period, the Office of Environmental Justice will be collecting comments. We usually try to make it available via email and snail mail if anybody wants to send them in that way, just to make sure. And it's 120 days, which, if anybody knows our comment periods, it's a pretty decently long comment period. But we also have to keep in mind that based on the time when we vote and when we release the draft, that will set the comment period into play. So we are looking at holidays that fall into that period of time. And we are looking, at like major holidays like Christmas, Thanksgiving, Hanukkah, Kwanzaa, Hanukkah, those holidays coming up. So we might want to factor some of that into our decision when it comes to releasing the document and when it comes to the comment period itself.
Eddie, I'm going to add the educational sessions. One of the things that we thought might be really helpful is to provide educational sessions with your constituents or with you that would help communicate with your constituents, whatever is needed to help you feel comfortable is, I think, what we want to do here. So just an offer.
Just an additional point of clarity. So when at the actual physical public hearings themselves, is there any sort of, I don't know if it's an open meetings, is there a mandate that a majority of the Climate Justice Working Group has to be present? I'm just trying to get some sense of what like our physical responsibilities are at these public, and I'm assuming that by now these are in person, these are not virtual anymore.
Right. These are going to be in person. There will be a virtual option. We will have, this available via WebEx as well. There is no requirement for members of the Climate Justice Working Group to be present at the hearings or even the educational sessions. We would prefer, some of you be present at the educational sessions, specifically the ones, if we're discussing it specifically with your constituencies. If you wanted to be available for that, that would be amazing, but there's no requirement for you to be there. But if you wanted to be present at the hearings, obviously, that is up to you, but there's no requirement. And the legislation doesn't really give us any guidance on that. So we're sort of going with the kind of basic structure that our hearings typically take.
Thank you.
Absolutely. But I will say, as a person who did this for several years, working with the Office of Communication Services, it's usually beneficial to have at least 1 or 2 people at a public hearing who can answer technical questions, because even though the public will be mostly making comments, there are times when people just simply will ask some technical questions, and there is a benefit to having somebody there who can answer questions.
By the way, Alana, to that end, let me speak for myself, because I have a ton of respect for my fellow working group members. If somebody asks me an actual technical question, I'll probably dive under the table. So I'm just wondering, like, and I'm absolutely going really fond of Alex and Amanda, so I'm not trying to dump on them. But is a little going to be or these, like, who will be there to kind of handle the inevitable professor from some community college that's got like a really deep question that I know I'm going to hide from?
Well, as I said, we'll also, in addition to having these meetings, these public hearings live and in person, they're also going to be on WebEx. So that means that people could attend from more remote locations. So if we do have a situation where somebody asks a technical question and people are not able to respond, hopefully we'll have at least somebody from staff or Alex or Amanda might be available via WebEx to answer a question or two. And from that inevitable college professor who has a very complicated and long-winded technical question.
With footnotes. Thanks a lot.
Absolutely. But I'm sure they'll write it in too. So we'll get it from both sides.
Okay.
So one thing, that was a good segue for my question was then how do we process the information that comes in?
That's the fun part. It really is going to be a basic categorization and reading of the comments. Unfortunately, the DEC doesn't have any software that categorizes and collects comments. So we'll kind of be doing it, I guess, the old-fashioned way, which is if we get mail, we will collect it and keep it for historical purposes. And if in email, it's going to all be collected. And when we do, we categorize it based on the comment, and that will all be a matter of the public record.
Alana, you may have mentioned this or covered it. I apologize if I didn't hear it, but is there going to be a through line with the public hearing sessions and the educational sessions? Like, will the educational pieces complement the public hearings as far as like geographic location, or has there been any thought around that?
That's what we were thinking, that we would try to sort of tailor, because we are looking to have these in specific areas, and we were hoping to tailor them to certain areas so that, you know, if somebody does have a question, if somebody, for example, wants to take a look at the map, we can show them the map right when they're there, or if it can be tailored specifically to the area. So if we do have a public meeting, which the goal is to have one in Buffalo, we'll be able to tailor some of the intros specifically to that region.
Okay. Thank you.
And like I said, we're not limited to 6. We can, if it turns out we need to spread these out just a little bit more to make sure that we're capturing more people, or if it's not convenient, we haven't set them in areas that are convenient enough, we can always add additional meetings. We just can't subtract them.
Okay. Well, I think I'm going to jump out of here and then jump up to, I want to discuss next steps and then also the calendar part. I feel like we're coming pretty close to a consensus on the indicators, that we feel pretty comfortable about the broad list of what we're including. About the relative importance of those is going to vary, but that's less so. So in some ways, we might be able to consolidate a meeting. Alana, Rosa, Amanda, what do you think? I know Eddie's happy.
If everyone is comfortable with the idea of sort of taking the 2 consensus building meetings and kind of, I don't want to say this is going to sound indelicate, but smushing them into 1 2-hour meeting, if that feels like that's something that, you know, everyone's capable of doing, I don't have a problem with it.
I will ask for a commitment to review what we send you for that the next meeting. So if we consolidate those, Amanda and I have a lot of work to do coming back into the diagnostics and then looking at those relative weights and figuring out how we can make some very important things like flooding matter more. You know, so those are the things that we need to take out from this from this meeting, we're going to do that work, but we're also going to need to then respond and provide some background to you. And if I can ask for all of you to commit to reading that before that, not necessarily the August 4th meeting, clearly, but that whatever combined August 12th or 26th meeting, that you can read something before then, that would be amazing. And I think it would help alleviate some of our stress of trying to make sure we get all the things we need discussed and reviewed before the vote.
Yeah, I mean, I think what's going to happen is we are going to revise the scenarios. There will be new information, and you're going to probably want to review in the meeting and after the meeting. So we would ask, if we do smush things into one meeting, that you have time, in mid-August to really dig into the maps, and we'll have to figure out at that point, what the feedback process is, because there will be kind of new things in there. And it sounds like whatever that meeting is will need to be 100% focused on the scoring scenarios. So hopefully have an earlier August meeting. I don't know whether that's the 4th or another date to cover any other open topics like the integration analysis, or preparing for that August 23rd CAC meeting, voting process, public comments, etc.
So we took away one meeting, but now we want to add one back.
We did take away one. We're just thinking of what can happen offline to make sure that the new maps, that you have time with them.
Yeah, that was a question actually I had, Amanda, was just the consideration around our next presentation to the Climate Action Council and that separate work stream that needs to happen to prepare that set of recommendations and presentation. Kind of wondering how that is getting woven into this timeline.
Yeah.
That's probably a question for the DEC. Hi, this is Rosa. So what we can do, if we're going to consolidate one of those August meetings, we could potentially use the opened up August date for you all to use an hour. It doesn't have to be 2 hours. Typically, when you discuss the CAC recs, you do it in an hour period. Or we could try to find a different hour timeline if one of those dates is not doable for everybody. And I see a question in the chat. So are we thinking of August 4th and August 26th, or the 12th and the 26th?
I don't know about everyone else. I mean, I see the attraction of having it at the end of the month, but I'm just worried if we're looking at August 26th, I'm just wondering, Labor Day weekend hovering, like, is that how likely is it everyone's going to be around?
I would be in favor of the 26th for this particular set of work or tasks that we have to address. But to Rosa's question, it seems like the sooner we could have a 1 hour meeting on the recommendations, the better. And if the majority of the groups already indicated that a time window works best, we may just want to like leverage that availability that everyone's already indicated, but open to pushback or anything, other options.
Quick question, Jared. When we're talking about the recommendations, are we talking about a meeting? Because I don't know how, I don't know if the rest of you all agree with this, but it felt like the way we've handled the recommendations so far, it's been kind of offline, right? In my email, and or am I misunderstanding? Are we talking about an hour to do what we've done for the first two sets of recommendations by email? Because it sounds like we haven't needed it before, right? Or am I misunderstanding what the recommendations hour is intended to do?
That was my understanding, was to have, I don't know if offline is the right term, but just designate an hour to like have the conversations. But if it's not needed or necessary, it seems like it's been pretty effective to just use that email thread to communicate. So yeah, I don't know. Rose, is that what you were thinking? Just having an hour to like go over that set.
Usually when you have done some video time to talk about panel recs, it's only been an hour. But again, whatever works for the working group members to get all their feedback together, we're happy to step in and set up a time, or you all can continue your ongoing thread for putting your recommendations into one place. And I think Abigail is asking about the topic you're working on right now, if it's ag and forestry and land use and local government next.
I remember the ag and forestry set. Not sure where we landed. The consensus with the group on land use and local government, though. We could have that conversation though between the group members, much like we did last time.
I thought we said ag and forestry. I didn't hear anybody talk about land use, local government. But I guess it depends if we need to get two done or not.
Yeah, I would just be in favor of starting the process sooner rather than later, because last time we were kind of pushing the envelope. We'd like to avoid that if we could. I mean, recognizing that everyone is extremely busy and it's the summer months and there's like more stacking up, but yeah, that would be my preference.
Yeah, to be honest, I thought I can't remember where I saw it. I thought I saw, I know I saw ag, and I thought somebody popped up land use somewhere along the line. But I'm actually trying to find out right now, because one of the things that's been helpful to us is, our policy committee friends over at New York Renews have been really good at consolidating the recommendations and then getting them back to us in a way that we can digest, and easier for us to read and figure out what we agree, don't agree with. So I believe that they're on the hook. They're going to do that for ag and land use for us. So if everybody's okay with land use, it sounds like that policy support will be forthcoming.
Yep, that sounds good. If you have the capacity to weigh in on both recommendations, that'd be great.
And when's the August CAC meeting?
Oh, let me remind myself. I thought it was the 22nd or the 23rd.
Yeah, I remember the 23rd is the date.
Mm-hmm.
So if we're looking at 20, is that a Monday? Sorry, I'm not looking at my calendar right now. Thursday.
Eddie, do you have a sense of how soon New York Renews may be able to get us feedback on those?
You're a mind reader. I just asked. So I'm pushing to that, if possible, to get us feedback by the week of August 16th.
Okay. Ideally, the beginning of that week, if we're going to be able to process it and get it ready to go by the 23rd.
And is it the 23rd? Is that the date for CAC?
That's what's on my calendar too. I don't have an exact time, but it says CAC.
I'll confirm when that meeting is, but it's my recollection they were talking about the 22nd or the 23rd. So the 23rd sounds right, but I'll confirm, and so that we don't run over today, because we have about 5 minutes left. For the August dates, you all have them on your calendars because I sent out the calendar hold. I'll just follow up with you all for the 12th and the 26th. It seems like we can keep those for this work stream on the definition. Is that right?
Yeah, with the understanding that they'll be consolidated, so we'll be picking like one or the other. Is that correct?
So we have 3 dates and we wanted to keep 2. So I'm trying to figure out which are the 2. And August 4th is next week. So if we wanted to keep that one, we'd have to determine that right away so we can organize everything we need. And then it would be, the other options are the 12th and the 26th. So what I'll do is I'll follow up with everyone by email and we can confirm which are the 2 dates you're going to move forward with. And then we can tie up the loose ends on the other work stream and how you all are gonna move forward with that. And then Alex, you went over your next steps on this work stream, and you'll also be reminded of all of that by email that you'll receive from Alex and I.
Okay. Yeah,
right.
I would just echo
Thanks.
what Abby said. Getting rid of the 4th would be best for me too. But I'm gonna respond to you.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you everyone once again for your 3 hours on this topic. I'm glad that we got a lot of conversation going. I agree with Alex. It sounds like we're close on the indicators, so that's good to hear. And we will reconvene in August. Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your week.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Thanks, everybody.
Hi, everyone.
Have a good day.